chimpanzees, our closest relatives in the animal kingdom. But when did our and their ancestors start going their separate ways? And where did our human lineage first originate? Until now, Africa, the home of today's chimpanzees, has always been considered the cradle of humanity. That view is now being called into question.
It wouldn't be surprising to see animals in Europe that may have been ancestral.
German researcher Madeleine Böhme discovers a puzzling jawbone in Greece. On Crete, researchers find the fossilized footprints of a mysterious biped.
And along comes presumably a little family group of these hominins.
And in Germany, a new extinct great ape comes to light.
We think this is a genuine transition, a missing link.
Was Europe, not Africa, the actual cradle of humanity? Athens, capital of Greece and ancient birthplace of democracy. For years now, the German paleontologist Madeleine Böhme has been researching the natural history of this region. What she discovered during that time could radically change our view of human evolution.
The Greek climate today is Mediterranean, hot, dry summers and cool, wet winters. 7 million years ago, things were very different. The landscape covered today by Athens used to be grassland, a savanna.
And the animal kingdom at that time was entirely different too. Greece was home to several species of elephant. There were also rhinos, giraffes, and ostriches, animals we know today from Africa.
It was 4 or 5 degrees warmer than now, and wetter too, a lost world.
At that time, 7 million years ago, a mysterious creature was living in southeastern Europe. Only a few traces of it still survive. It may have been our very earliest ancestor. The search for clues begins in Athens in 1944. The city has been occupied by the German Wehrmacht for 3 years. The situation is tense, and resistance by Greek partisans against the occupiers is becoming fiercer by the day. Among the Germans is the geologist Bruno von Freyberg. His task is to supervise construction work on new bunkers and gun positions. On the grounds of a farm on the outskirts of Athens, his workers discover something unusual in the rubble.
Sehen Sie mal, was wir hier gefunden haben.
Inside a block, firmly bonded to the rock, a piece of ancient bone.
Wo haben Sie es gefunden? Dort hinten.
It's just one of many fossils that now come to light. Some are astonishingly well preserved.
The paleontologist Bruno von Freyberg knew right away that this was an extraordinary find. He told his workers to retrieve as many of the bones as they could, to preserve them for science.
In 1949, von Freyberg describes the fossils in a scientific paper, and he also lists a monkey jaw among the finds.
The paper, in German, was only 5 pages long and was published in Greece, but not much attention was paid to it. People thought it was an ordinary monkey jaw.
Only decades later, in 1972, does it become clear that von Freyberg actually discovered the remains of an extinct great ape. For researchers, this difference is crucial because in the animal kingdom, the great apes are our closest relatives. In our shared evolutionary history, around 14 million years ago, the branch of the orangutans formed, today, they live in Southeast Asia. Then, some 10 million years ago, the evolutionary line of the gorillas formed. They are only found in Africa. It was 7 to 8 million years ago that finally the chimpanzees embarked on their own evolutionary path. They are our closest animal relatives. The human-chimpanzee split finally marks the beginning of our own evolutionary development. But where can the jawbone of Grecopithecus be placed on this timeline? Von Freyberg had not determined its age, and the jawbone had also disappeared. Then in 2009, at an excavation site in Bulgaria, researchers find a single molar. It too comes from an extinct great ape. It's a sensational find because scientists can date the tooth. It's over 7 million years old and comes precisely from that crucial phase when man and chimpanzee parted company and our own evolution began.
At that moment, I suddenly remembered Bruno von Freyberg and thought there might be a connection in terms of age and also locality between the tooth from Bulgaria and the jawbone from Greece. Actually, that was what really got me interested in the topic of human evolution.
Could our roots really lie in Europe? If Madeleine Böhmer's suspicions are confirmed, it would amount to a scientific earthquake. Since chimpanzees live in Africa today, and not only look, but behave so much like us, researchers suspected as early as the 19th century that humanity had also originated in Africa. This assumption has survived to the present day, and it's hardly ever been called into question. And something else has also made us assume, until now at least, that Africa is the cradle of humanity. Numerous important fossils of our early human ancestors have been discovered there since the 1920s. Most experts are quite certain that humanity can only have originated in Africa and nowhere else. So the idea that our roots extend even further back and even outside Africa has gone against the general consensus so far. At the University of Missouri in the US, the anatomist Carol Ward is working on reconstructing the evolutionary history of some of the most famous finds from Africa. Among them is probably the most well-known African fossil, Lucy, a pre-human of the species Australopithecus afarensis. 40% of the skeleton has been preserved.
Lucy is sort of the poster child for human evolution because she's so complete. And when she was found in the 70s, she was not only the most complete skeleton, she at that time was earliest in our timeline of human evolution.
Lucy was discovered in 1974 during an excavation by the American paleoanthropologist Donald Johanson in the Ethiopian Afar region. The Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, was being played in the researchers' camp, hence the name. Also because the remains were most likely those of a female.
Lucy lived 3 million years ago, so she's really about halfway through time since we branched off from a chimpanzee lineage, from an ancestor that wasn't like a chimp, wasn't like a human, that lived 6 or 8 million years ago.
Using forensic methods, it was even possible to completely reconstruct Lucy and give her a face. She was only 1 meter tall and weighed 29 kilograms. Unlike a great ape, Lucy could already walk well on 2 legs. However, she clearly arrived long after the divergence of the human and chimpanzee lineages, around 7 million years ago. It's also difficult to place Lucy with any precision in the human lineage, because during that phase, our early history of development was already well advanced. Africa is like one huge experimental laboratory of human evolution. Many species of pre-human lived side by side.
She may not have been ancestral to you and me. She was a member of one of several species of Australopiths. Which one of those was our ancestor, if any, we don't really know. But they're all similar in many ways, and it's certain that our ancestor was something like them and shared the features that most of them have in common.
This uncertainty also makes one thing clear. To understand the origin of humankind, we have to look even further back and come as close as possible to the human-chimpanzee split. And this is why another, older find from Africa is now the object of very special attention: Toumai. Sahelanthropus chadensis, to give his scientific name, is discovered in Chad in 2001. The locality is the Sahara, far away from the known sites in East Africa where Lucy was also found. Over millions of years, the fossil has become greatly distorted. So it has to be straightened out in a complex process on the computer to determine whether the fossil comes from an extinct great ape or an early human ancestor. It becomes clear that Toumai has a mixture of features. His thick simian brow ridges resemble those of a male gorilla or chimpanzee, but underneath, the face is slightly flatter. However, for many researchers, the most important anatomical detail lies below the skull.
We know that one of the earliest features that sets us apart from our ape forebears is standing upright on 2 feet. One thing we have is the hole where the spinal cord leaves the skull. And in humans, this is tucked up underneath the skull, like we see right here in Sahelanthropus. This is the hole. It's called foramen magnum, which means big hole, and it's right here underneath the skull. So when I put it up here, we can tell that the vertebral column would have been underneath the head. In a chimpanzee or a monkey or some other animal, that foramen magnum would be back here because it's quadrupedal.
But Toumai cannot be precisely dated. The discoverers can only estimate his age at between 6 and 7 million years. So was Sahelanthropus at the very beginning of our evolution? Or could the finds from Europe be even older? Right now, it's still no more than a suspicion, because the molar from Bulgaria is only a small indication. And so far, the jawbone discovered in Athens in 1944 has not been precisely dated either. Madeleine Böhme is going to have to re-examine it using state-of-the-art methods. The trouble is, the jawbone can no longer be found. She spends 2 years hunting for it, without success. Finally, she's advised to talk to one of Bruno von Freiberg's former colleagues, long since retired. This is the breakthrough.
When our collections were partly being dismantled at the Institute to make space for laboratories, Professor von Freiberg said to me, "Dr. Schüffler, this is the most valuable piece from our collection. Treat it with great care." So the secretary and I placed it in a safe at the Institute,
where it remained for many decades.
When they said, "Oh, you mean the monkey tooth? That's in the safe back here," that was an unbelievable moment.
Bleiben Sie mal einen Moment bitte dran, ich schaue nach.
Dann wurde der Safe geöffnet.
Then the safe was opened, and out came a Tupperware container with a label on it, bearing an exclamation mark in red felt pen. Important. Greykopithecus freibergi. Having it handed to me in a Tupperware container, okay, I guess that was a very good way of storing it, was still slightly bizarre all the same.
In 2014, the fossil is taken to the University of Tübingen. There, the jawbone of Grecopithecus can finally be examined. The find is fragile and has also been damaged during the war. But the researchers no longer have to rely exclusively on external anatomical features. Now they can even explore the inside of the fossil without destroying it. High-resolution images from a computer tomograph show every detail of the jawbone. The dental roots are decisive here. What will their analysis reveal? Will they prove typical of a great ape?
Here we have a 3D print of the tooth of Grecopithecus that we saw on the computer. And you can see that the roots are fused almost to the end. That's very typical of human dental roots. And if we look at a chimpanzee tooth, here's exactly the same tooth, lower jaw, premolar, we have a wide separation. Here I have exactly the same tooth, but human, and we only see one root. With Grecopithecus, the roots are on their way to fusing. That is, they're partially fused, and they also converge and come together here. This is the state we know from pre-humans.
What seems like only a minor detail at first glance is an important indication for the researchers that Grecopithecus belongs to the human lineage. But is he actually older than all the African pre-humans discovered so far? The former Nazi Party rally grounds in Nuremberg. Even 75 years after the end of the Second World War, they are still a bizarre monument to National Socialism. This is where Madeleine Böhme finally makes her successful breakthrough in dating the rediscovered fossil. The catacombs of the Congress Hall contain the other fossils that Bruno von Freyberg collected in Athens in 1944. They were handed over to the Nuremberg Natural History Society, which keeps them here. For Madeleine Böhme, this discovery is like finding buried treasure.
So he really did mark them in his own handwriting. We can see that on this one, I think. Yes, here. No one knew the importance of this collection. I knew it had to exist, but in terms of quality and the number of pieces, I had absolutely no idea. Without this collection, we'd never have been able to reconstruct the environment or date things at all. So this is an absolute treasure. The jawbone on its own is all well and good, but it would have been simply isolated in time and space.
Ultimately, the remains of a very special animal are key to determining the historical time period.
The age is always in the rock, in the sediment. The problem here is that we had a drawer full of bones and the sediment was missing. But luckily, we have giraffe bones. And on this bone, we did the dating. There's a drilled hole, and if we look inside, we can see that it's half full of reddish sediment, and the other half is a cavity. The sediment was liquid when it flowed into the bone and settled at the bottom, with a cavity above it. So this was up, and this was down. With this information, we can date it.
Since the researchers now know the original location of the fossil in the rock, they can determine the orientation of tiny magnetic particles inside it. When the sediment was deposited with the bone and became solid rock, these particles aligned with the Earth's magnetic field. Over millions of years, the Earth's magnetic field reversed time and time again, from North to South Pole and back, but the orientation of the particles remained fixed inside the rock. Since we know when these changes in polarity occurred, the age of the rock can be derived from this paleomagnetic fingerprint. It's now clear that not only the giraffe bone, but also the jawbone are 7.175 million years old. Madeleine Böhmer's discovery is a sensation. Her findings are published in 2017 and cause a huge stir worldwide.
To me, it wouldn't be surprising to see animals in Europe that may have been ancestral to Australopiths or close relatives of Australopiths. So I think it was really exciting. It's one fossil, and there's debate about it because it's just a jaw and it doesn't have post-cranial elements. We don't know about the locomotion. We don't know a lot about the animal yet. But the fact that it's a clue that, in fact, they might be relatives of hominids or even ancestral, that's really exciting. So I feel like I'm cheering them all on, hoping that they find more.
Whether or not our oldest human ancestor actually did come from Europe and not from Africa has not yet been conclusively proven by Madeleine Böhmer's discovery. The molar and the jawbone are important indications, but not yet clear evidence. But then, on Crete, a further important clue surfaces. On the northwest coast of the island, Madeleine Böhmer meets an international research team. In 2002, close to present-day Trachelus, a Polish paleontologist discovered mysterious fossilized footprints. They bear the traces of bipedalism, a crucial feature that distinguishes our early ancestors from great apes. And they're around 6 million years old, older than almost all the finds in Africa.
So there's the heel. This is the outline of the whole print. There you go, that's the ball, the big toe, and the smaller side toes. There's the whole thing.
The shape of the foot and the forward-pointing toes really are reminiscent of human footprints. It seems out of the question that they were made by an animal that only stood briefly on its hind legs, because there are no clues such as claw marks or anything similar.
These footprints, as far as we can tell, are footprints of hominins, in other words, early members of our own lineage, and they are the earliest hominin footprints known anywhere in the world by a considerable margin, maybe at least 3 million years or so. And I love them because they are a record of life. Think about that. I mean, you know, if you found, like, you know, the skeleton of an early hominin, that would, of course, be cool, but it's the skeleton of a dead hominin. What we have here is, it's like a sort of static film clip in stone of a family of live hominins. Not only is it the case that the surfaces that you see reflected in the stone is the actual living flesh of the foot, right? You know, but you're seeing behavior.
In Tanzania, comparable traces were discovered in 1978. The locality is called Laetoli. The imprints are from pre-humans, probably even relatives of Lucy. However, they are only 3.6 million years old, much younger than those of the mysterious bipeds on Crete. They lived at a far earlier evolutionary phase, as proven by dating of the sandstone in which their tracks are preserved. But the researchers can interpret even more from this locality.
We've got a shoreline here, maybe it's a lagoon, maybe a little river delta, we're not quite sure, but we're very close to the water's edge. And along comes presumably a little family group of these hominins, looking from a distance, they look kind of like little hairy humans, or like little chimpanzees that somebody's taught to walk on their back legs. The tallest ones might be about 1.40 meters in height or so, the youngsters perhaps half that. And what are they doing? Well, they seem to be just wandering around. To guess, they're probably foraging for food at the water's edge. The footprints on the surface sort of meander around. There's no very clear pattern. It's not like they're purposefully walking in some direction. They actually look like they're having a nice day on the beach.
In the next step, the researchers want to date the rock strata with the mysterious footprints even more precisely. The results will only be definite later on. They are crucial for determining precisely when bipedalism first began, because it's only found in humans and their ancestors.
This very question of bipedalism is key to differentiating between early chimpanzees and pre-humans. The only way to answer it 100% is from the footprints. Of course, a bone can also be interpreted as having come from a biped, but it's the footprint itself that provides the ultimate proof.
But how can they prove that the footprints on Crete actually came from pre-humans? Madeleine Böhme travels to an animal park in southern Germany. Here, together with her preparator, Henrik Stör, she wants to carry out an unusual investigation. The Schwabenpark in Kaisersbach is one of the few places where chimpanzees can be seen outside zoos.
Shoelaces. You're interested in those, aren't you? There are feet inside, and they look different from yours. Well, it's time to tie them up again, otherwise we can't go for a walk, can we? You want me to do something, don't you? Ah, you wanted to see what I smell like. That's a wristwatch, Jenny. Humans have those because they're stressed out the whole time. Yes, it's a watch. It's interesting, isn't it? It's used to measure time. The time we have here on Earth.
Who's watching who? Madeleine Böhme is not dealing with ancient bones here, but with a creature that has a will of its own.
You're doing that perfectly. Where did you learn to do that?
She'll have to be patient if she wants to take a footprint from the chimp, because that's the real aim of the visit. Precise footprints of chimpanzees are hard to come by, even for experts. A box with sediment is prepared. Will Jenny the chimpanzee play along? A first attempt. Jenny is still suspicious. It's clear that she finds the soft sediment less than appealing. Getting an accurate footprint proves to be more difficult than expected. But only a footprint showing the anatomy in detail will be enough for a comparison with the footprints found on Crete. A second attempt, and Jenny is still skeptical. This time, Madeleine Böhme lends a firm hand, and it works.
We've done it. Wow, Jenny, fantastic.
Ganz toll gemacht. So, jetzt nicht wieder reintreten. Das ist prima.
That's great.
Ja. Toll.
Excellent.
Super.
Super, Jenny.
As the basis for a precise three-dimensional reconstruction on the computer later on, Madeleine Böhme quickly photographs the fresh footprint from all sides.
Das reicht. Super.
The differences in comparison to the footprint from Crete are quite clear.
On the print from Crete, the ball of the foot is huge. And this feature is missing with the chimp. A chimpanzee's toe is at a big angle to its foot. Here it's almost 90 degrees. With human footprints, the toes are very close together. The lateral digital impressions are very small here and get even smaller, whereas here they're quite big. So, significant differences.
A chimpanzee's foot can grip almost like a hand, enabling it to grab branches easily. By comparison, the footprints from Crete are far more similar to those of modern man. The shape of the foot indicates that its owner was a biped. With chimpanzees, however, not only the foot shape, but the entire anatomy is optimized for walking on all fours.
The knee is angled too. You have a fairly short lumbar spine. It's quite short here because you prefer everything to be angled. Then you're walking upright. And you can always see your angle. Always the angle. Now you can really see it properly. And now you're standing on two legs. Wonderful.
Jenny needs a break. She's certainly earned her treat.
The footprints from Tracholos are clearly human. The question is, were they great apes or bipedal hominins? It's now clear that they were bipedal pre-humans. The comparison with the chimp here leaves no other possibility.
Comparing the footprints has been worthwhile, and it suggests that bipedalism could have originated in Europe. But what could have triggered the start of the human lineage in Europe? Bulgaria may hold the key to this. The single molar of Grecopithecus was discovered there in 2009. The locality, a former riverbed in the lowlands of Thrace.
I suspect that the early pre-human hominins, like Grecopithecus, especially had a close connection to river systems. That would have given them drinking water and different vegetation from that in the open savanna.
Might there be even more bones of pre-humans hidden at the excavation site? That kind of find would be like winning the lottery. From the air, the course of the ancient river is clearly visible. The locality was discovered by accident. A company was mining some sand there for highway construction. At the excavation site, Madeleine Böhme meets Nikolai Spasov, the director of the National Museum of Natural History in Sofia. The Bulgarian researchers have discovered thousands of fossils of extinct animals here over the years. Madeleine Böhme has already assisted them several times with their excavations. In this season too, revealing new bones have been recovered. The leg bones of an extinct species of giraffe, for instance. The bones have to be put in plaster to make them easier to recover. The preparation only takes place later on in the lab.
Every year we have many new bones. For example, very interesting is now the mandible of relatively small carnivore. It could be a relatively small cat, but we will see after. And this is a part
yes.
Yeah.
It's a cat.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Most probably, yeah.
Yeah. Great.
A tibia of rhino, distal part of tibia. We have here Ceratotherium, the so-called white rhino.
Yeah.
Now, white rhino exists in Africa, of course, with another species. But the beginning of this genus is here, in the savanna, old savannas of the Balkans.
Yeah.
Our secret is a new bone after the tooth, femur of hominid, and it could be our Grecopithecus.
Can I see it?
In this moment, yes, of course. In this moment, it is under study. This bone is extremely promising for understanding the locomotion of this hominid.
Since the original is extremely fragile, Spasov shows Madeleine Böhme a replica.
Yeah, our team is very proud with this.
Oh, yes, you can be proud.
Yeah.
Boah, I'm surprised. Great, Nikolai. Congratulations.
Thank you.
If it's confirmed that the bone belonged to Grecopithecus, and if it reveals signs of bipedalism, that would be further important proof. What's more, the other fossils from Asmaka reveal that not only Greece, But also Bulgaria had a landscape like that of today's Africa. In a nearby museum, the researchers have even reconstructed whole skeletons from that phase. A Deinotherium, an ancient elephant with downward curving tusks. A hyena. And a saber-toothed cat. With the help of all the fossils, the animal world to which Grecopithecus once belonged can be precisely reconstructed. In an artist's impression, the researchers have brought that world back to life. A savanna filled with the forebears of today's elephants, gazelles, rhinos, and zebras, which once extended across vast regions of the eastern Mediterranean. And in the midst of them all, Grecopithecus, as he might once have looked. It was Charles Darwin, founder of the theory of evolution, who first suspected that the origins of humankind lay in a savanna. This idea became known as the savanna hypothesis. According to it, our ancestors had to adapt to the disappearance of the forests, their original home, by standing upright on two legs. That meant that their hands were now free to make tools, for example. Bipedalism also guaranteed a better overview. An interpretation for which Darwin was mocked by many contemporaries, as in this cartoon. Assuming that the cradle of humanity is in Africa, the savanna hypothesis is actually untenable because there was hardly any savanna there 7 million years ago, but mainly forest. With the finds from Europe, however, the hypothesis is gaining a new lease of life.
The African savannas appeared far later, only 2 or 3 million years ago. The savannas here are much, much older, around 7 million years old. And these very old non-African savannas now contain an early pre-human. This doesn't place the whole theory of evolution in doubt, but it does shift it to a much earlier time, and also, significantly, to an entirely different continent.
But the fauna is only part of the picture. Does the flora support this new savanna hypothesis as well? In the sediment surrounding the Greek fossils, Madeleine Böhme discovers tiny quartz-like particles. These are so-called phytoliths, formed by plants, and differ depending on different genera. They are highly resilient and can survive for millions of years. With these tiny plant particles, Madeleine Böhme can show that the region at that time was indeed predominantly grassland. Long before similar environmental changes began in Africa, the forests in the Mediterranean region were already in decline. As a result of sinking temperatures and increasing aridity. And there is also something else to suggest that humans originated in Europe. At the University of Toronto, paleoanthropologist David Begon has been researching the genesis of great apes and humans for 40 years. And his work is coming up with some surprises. In the phase when the lineages of today's great apes were forming, these animals lived mainly in Europe. Hundreds of such fossils have come to light since the mid-19th century. The new finds from Bulgaria and Greece are in line with this. In Africa, on the other hand, the ancestors of the great apes left virtually no traces during this phase. Although conditions in Europe became increasingly difficult for them due to climatic changes, they managed to populate a huge region. Their strategy, quite simply, intelligence.
They were smart. They had big brains. They had bigger brains than any monkey has. They had bigger brains than any gibbon has. They had brains the size of relative to their body size of chimpanzees. And that doesn't happen unless there's a good reason for it. Brains are metabolically very, very expensive. And you don't get a big brain, you don't maintain a large brain unless you use it for something. Hey, Andrew, how you doing?
Hey, David.
Shortly before the beginning of our own evolution, great apes in Europe experienced a golden age. But to this day, these finds have hardly been noticed by researchers.
There is a widespread concept that African apes and humans evolved in Africa and have always been in Africa and never left Africa. I mean, they may have had some offshoots that went roaming into Europe, but basically everything happens in Africa. You can't ignore the evidence that we actually have. And you can't just be dismissive of the evidence we have by saying, well, I know that we're going to find more relevant evidence that will be contradictory or that will prove my preconception that everything happened in Africa in the future, but we just haven't found it yet. That's just not very good science, in my opinion.
Researchers are gaining an increasingly accurate idea of what the European great apes were like, and the number of finds from new excavations continues to grow. The Alpine foothills in the south of Germany. Since 2011, in this clay pit, Madeleine Böhme and her team have been excavating the fossilized remains of animals that lived here 11.6 million years ago. Large turtles and giant salamanders once swam in a river here. On its banks, there were prehistoric pigs and ancestors of the elephants. Even an early panda has been discovered.
That's a great find.
Every day, the researchers come across new bones, like this vertebra of a forest antelope, perfectly preserved. But what makes this locality unique are 37 fossils of a new species of great ape that were discovered here. It's one of the most significant finds of this kind ever. The clay has even preserved parts of the skeleton.
If we have such complete bones of the skeleton, we can say a great deal about the animal's musculoskeletal systems and their way of life, far more than with skull fragments or teeth. This comparatively long ulna, it's almost as long as mine, tells us that the arms were far longer than the legs. That's a typical feature of great apes. Great apes climbing in trees and swinging along. The tibia, however, is quite short, shorter than the ulna. In humans, it's the other way round. Our tibia is longer than the ulna, but this tibia at the end is built in such a way that it shows us that the great ape walked with straight knees. Also, the ankle here has the same structure as our human one, directionally aligned for walking rather than for climbing trees. So we see this as a hybrid form, which can be a precursor of today's human bipedalism, and can also be a precursor of the tree-dwelling, four-legged existence of great apes. A genuine transition, a missing link.
The researchers name their find Danuvius guggenmosi, but it's also known as Udo. That's because the day on which the first fossil was discovered was the 70th birthday of the popular German musician Udo Lindenberg, whose songs were constantly being played on the radio that day, a parallel to the famous Lucy from Africa, who was named after a Beatles song.
When you dig, you take what you get, of course. But naturally, if we had a complete skull of Udo or Danuvius guggenmosi, we'd know a great deal more about his brain size, for example. We could maybe say more about his direct evolutionary relationship to chimpanzees and humans, too. If we had a complete foot, we could be more certain about bipedalism and the distance he could cover. The important thing is that we have the key in our hand when it comes to really being able to answer that in the future.
15% of Udo's skeleton has now come to light, including fossils from many different anatomical regions. a key advantage when it comes to getting a more accurate picture of this great ape. To get a better idea of the body's proportions, the fossils are laid out, with missing parts substituted by replicas. The replicas can be produced on a 3D printer. By mirroring the left tibia, for instance, the right one can be copied.
In the old days, that had to be modeled manually with putty or clay. And now we get a one-to-one image just by mirroring it. That really helps us with this reconstruction. And even if it's just a copy, it still brings us that much closer to our ancestor.
No comparable find has been made anywhere in Africa. Together with the other extinct great apes from Europe, Udo is a further indication that it was in Europe that our evolution began. Even the size and weight of this great ape already correspond to later species of pre-humans. This reconstruction shows Udo standing upright, with his legs and hips straight. Everything points to the fact that he is a common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees. And he's a European. But why don't any comparable African finds exist from this period? Madeleine Böhme came across a possible explanation. An electron microscope takes an even closer look at the sediment around the lower jaw of Grecopithecus, and traces are found of a massive environmental change that hit North Africa at that time. Magnified 10,000 times, the tiny dust particles making up most of the sediment form a very special geological fingerprint. This shape of particle and specific patterns on its surface are only formed when dust is blown by wind. The individual dust grains collide again and again and grind each other down. The chemical composition of the rock is also clear, and it proves that this dust came from the Sahara.
There were huge amounts of dust at that time. Up to 1/4 kilogram of dust per square meter was deposited each year. That's a huge amount. Areas like that do still exist, but they're very inhospitable. Today, we have that level of dust in the Sahel zone, where vast amounts are blown off the Sahara Desert. And back then, southern Greece had the same level of dust.
This is the first time the researchers have been able to date the earliest known Sahara phase with precision. It must have been at least as long ago as Grecopithecus's age, that is, 7.2 million years. Several million years earlier than previously assumed. If humankind really did originate in Europe, this vast desert would certainly have been a barrier, one that our early ancestors could not have crossed. But this early desert phase was followed again by a period with a humid climate, during which the Sahara was covered with green vegetation. It was during this phase, which coincides with the emergence of the oldest African finds, that early human ancestors coming from Europe could easily have reached Africa via the Middle East. And they could have slowly spread to Africa in this way and continued their evolution there after an initial European chapter, as African fossil finds suggest. The ancestors of the chimpanzees and gorillas could also have taken this route from Europe to Africa. Maybe they followed the receding forests as far as the equatorial areas of Africa, where they could continue to live in trees. One species, however, Grecopithecus, took a different route. He remained in Europe, adapted to the savanna environment, and established a new lineage, that of humankind. Perhaps the researchers will soon encounter new finds in the Mediterranean region as well, to further support their ideas. Madeleine Böhme is going to continue following these traces. For her, this is just the beginning of further research.
There have been various spectacular discoveries from recent research that throw an entirely new light on the role of Europe in the origin of man. It's fantastic to be a part of all this, and I'm really excited about what we're going to find next.
One thing seems to be clear above all. Evolution doesn't fit in neatly with human geographical categories. Over millions of years, driven by environmental changes, humankind seems to have steadily evolved across a large region that initially encompassed Europe and later Africa. Humans constantly populated new habitats, and in the process, crossed borders between entire continents.